Crossflation and the fiat money fiasco. In one of those odd coincidences that make history so interesting, it turns out that the European adventurer Marco Polo was wandering through Kublai's kingdom at the time, and as we know, Marco Polo was a pretty keen observer. He'd never seen paper money before, but the canny Italian caught on immediately, writing in his travels. You might say that Kublai has the secret of alchemy and perfection. The Khan causes every year to be made such a vast quantity of this money, which costs him nothing, that it must equal in amount all the treasure of the world. Marco Polo was understandably skeptical of the Khan's grand scheme, and wrote of the consequences of this early experiment in currency inflation. As he wrote, the best families in the empire were ruined, a new set of men came into the control of public affairs, and the country became the scene of internecine warfare and confusion. Polo took his keen observations back to the West. How much influence his writings may have had concerning the subject is unknown. Perhaps his warnings did in fact put people off. Anyway, all we know is that paper banknotes would not appear in Europe for nearly 400 years after he returned home and published his findings. If you're wondering who the first to issue the banknote, it was Sweden. What Khan understood nearly a millennium ago is still put into practice today. And it has many doomers cheering or reeling an end to the paper money, or boosting the latest conspiracy that the US dollar is doomed. Recently, Argentina and Brazil discussed the forming of a common currency. I can't count how many messages I get saying, the petrodollar is over, man. Look what this country is doing, or that company or country is doing. Nonsense. Follow the Fed and act accordingly. Right now, their number one target is inflation, and that soon will change. The Fed rate rise has been nothing short of historic. Look at the chart you're looking at right now. The rate of change is the greatest ever in history. I don't have any reason to believe this will slow down until inflation is under control. And believe it or not, we are seeing signs that the Fed is actually, or perceptibly, achieving its goals. Money frenzy. It's important to keep in mind the meaning of the term inflation. Today, people tend to think of it exclusively in the sense of rising prices of goods and services in the marketplace. But originally, it meant the expansion of the money supply beyond the need to simply meet demand. When that happens, you have an excess of currency chasing the same amount of goods and services, which is what drives the market price of them up. Thus, the price inflation is a consequence of monetary inflation. It isn't so much a matter of the price going up as it is the value of the currency going down. Deflation is the opposite. It is triggered by a withdrawal of currency from the economy, and that's on purpose. As economist Ludwig von Mises put, the most important thing to remember is that inflation is not an act of God. Inflation is not a catastrophe of the elements or a disease that comes like the plague. Inflation is policy. Inflation is at the point where mainstream rap artists can't help but talk about it. Sorry, I had to show you this clip because it made me howl. It's just too funny. And some of her other comments are actually even worse. So I can only come to this conclusion. Either she's doing some grandmaster messing with her followers, or she is absolutely clueless about economics. This is Cardi B. I'll let you read the quote herself. It's just too funny. Crossflation and understanding the US dollar. One of the major deterrents to the rise of America would be a cratering US dollar, something that's predicted by many of the self-appointed experts in the field of economics, specifically in the gold sector. I couldn't disagree more. Today, we see disinflation metrics in many commodities and sectors of the economy that were experiencing significant inflation in 2022. In fact, deflation is the ultimate boogeyman that is just around the corner. In 2020, I coined the term crossflation, and that is exactly the new state of affairs that are upon us. Crossflation means that we have areas of broad deflation with concentrated pockets of inflation popping up here and there and real wages losing purchasing power. Understanding that is central to the way I see the status of the US dollar going forward. Crossflation will be the direct result of the implementation of MMT as the eventual guiding monetary policy. Certain sectors of the economy, those that are the primary recipients of MMT's largesse, have and will experience significant inflation. For example, the real world economy, like building a mine, etc. On the other side, there will be significant deflation in sectors that are in direct competition with the ones that have the most benefit from the government's easy money, which is now the velocity of capital gone, and think the digital world is an example. Demand for the dollar. There is no doubt that there are some challenges faced by the US dollar going forward. A number of powerful forces are running loose: inflation, deflation, stagflation, crossflation, recession, depression, economic collapse, defaults, bankruptcies. All these things are in play, and no one can say with certainty what the eventual outcome will be as they interact. But interest rates are just as critical. Policy, policy, policy. Many, if not most, of the mainstream economic talking heads are predicting a devaluation of the US dollar, if not the outright end of the US dollar's reign as the reserve currency of the world. Some are calling for a ruinous inflation that will savage the currency, if not totally destroy it. I have a totally different view. I don't like baseless speculation. As I've said over and over, I prefer to deal with what lies right in front of me. And what I see is a world that is currently in desperate need of US dollars, regardless of the alchemy that Argentina and Brazil may create. And it will be a long time, the US dollar. It's within the full power and authority of the US Fed via the tools of FMC, fiscal, monetary, coordination, as I explain in my book, which they've done for many decades after World War II. And then MMT, it's a transition, or shall we call it transitory, to print the digits necessary to satisfy the global dollar addiction. If you take nothing else away from these writings, take this: the US dollar will remain the strongest global fiat currency for many more decades. The debt factor. Other countries are craving the US dollars. Look at this chart right here. They have borrowed to build out their infrastructure, modernize their industries, develop their natural resources, and so on and so on. Those debts must be paid back in the US dollars, not the local currency, because you can just inflate your way out of debt. And who is to say that Brazilitina, or whatever they want to call it, peso that's going to come out of Argentina and Brazil's new currency, will happen or even succeed? Do not forget, Argentina is where dreams go to die. Just ask Doug Casey. There will be bankruptcies and defaults along the way. There will also be places where nationalization of resources takes place. But in general, countries with access to capital in the form of US dollars will not want to jeopardize that access. It's a self-fulfilling loop. Continuing indebtedness that must be paid off in US dollar naturally creates a continuing demand for US dollar, hence the addiction of the world to the US dollar. The rest of the world is in a predicament I call the US DIC. D stands for debt in US dollars is continuing or rising. Income, I, is down in the US dollar and the US purchases fewer imports. C, capital outflows are increasing of these countries, meaning foreigners are selling assets in order to acquire US dollars. This means that the central banks, corporations, states, and provinces of the rest of the world are going to be in a perpetual shortage of US dollars. This is especially true during the pandemic, and we've seen it definitely in 2022. And its associated crises as people everywhere are engaged in a flight to safety, which allows meaning dollars. Now, I get all the banks are talking about this is the decade of the emerging markets. How have you fared following the bankers and analysts? Any high demand strengthens the market value of any commodity, including money. The rest of the world is in deflation, then eventually stagflation, and then inflation, as we've seen. And then the cycle rinse, repeat. At a time when the US markets are having their great reset, yes, the rest of the world will experience deflation while the US markets keep attracting money and remain on an inflationary trajectory. In a sense, it's global crossflation. Through it all, the dollar will remain dominant, and the Fed's implementation of international swap lines will continue. And remember, I'm not talking hundreds of years out. I'm talking in my own time frame and your investment horizon. Stay safe. Subscribe to the KRO, which is a Katusa Resource Opportunities, to find out exactly what prices I'm buying at and what price I sell at before the trade occurs. And you get to sell before I do. If you want to give your portfolio an edge, consider becoming a member and giving it a try for yourself.